So if I played a small role to help enable that kind of positive thinking, um, that was one of the things that made me the most proud. I mean, it doesn't even matter if they remember me or not. It's just how they felt when they saw themselves in the movie.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mentor Talks. I'm Maria Iliadis, and today I'll be your host from the Office of Alumni Affairs in the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. Our office opens the door to the million-strong Exchange Alumni Network, professional development, and grant opportunities for alumni of U.S. government educational and cultural exchange programs. Mentor Talks is a chance for you to connect with Exchange alumni leaders, hear their stories, and get career advice. Like our guest today, Dr. Steve Arunsak, a visual anthropologist, documentary filmmaker, and an American Film Showcase Exchange alumni. Dr. Arunsak was the lead cultural advisor for the Disney film Raya and the Last Dragon, a film that was inspired by the cultures of Southeast Asia. He's also a renowned scholar. His work on the refugee experience and ethnographic work on Laos has been recognized through awards at California State University, where he teaches, and through being named one of the first National Gates Millennium Scholars. Dr. Runsak's own films have been aired on PBS, and he has taught workshops around the world in U.S. embassies and also for Disney Global Public Policy and UNICEF. I am so excited to have a conversation with him today on Mentor Talks in honor of Asian American Pacific Islander Month. Welcome, Dr. Runsak.
Thank you very much, Maria. I'm super excited to be here.
We're super excited to have you. So to start with, could you take us on the journey that took you to working with Disney? How does someone end up doing that?
Wow, that's one of those journeys that you kind of reflect on after it's all over. While it's happening, it's kind of this, its own little animal. But to make a long story short, one of my colleagues was approached by Disney, saying that they were going to create this animated feature about Southeast Asia, and she referred them to me. And from then on, we started a discussion. I think it was in late 2018. And I remember being on the phone with Oz Not Sure, and she was the producer of Moana. So that really piqued my interest. Like, this is somebody that has a strong track record of incorporating different voices into movies. So we had that first conversation. 3 months later, I was riding down the Mekong with the co-directors and the visual development team, along with some other really fantastic storytellers in Laos. So it was really a quick kind of springboard into this whole thing. And then from that point on, I was on the project for a couple of years. But it started off with a colleague, kind of referencing me to this project, and then just starting a conversation and just kind of clicking with them. And we were in Laos before you knew it, and that was the beginning of the journey.
That really speaks to how important relationships are in one's professional work.
Right. Yes. Absolutely. I think one of the things that young people can take to heart is all of the experiences now and the team building and all the group projects that you're in. You never know where that's going to lead. The colleague that referenced me to this project, or that referred me to this project, she had been a friend for decades, and we'd worked on various projects. So every little thing, you never know what it's going to lead to, but just think of it as like seeds into the ground. It could flourish into this beautiful garden.
That's such a wonderful thing. To me, that feels like such a professorial thing to say. And I know that you've gotten awards too for your teaching. So I'm also wondering how your work as a professor has informed your work in the film industry.
I think it's the first thing that I've kind of begun to realize, and this is like almost 20 years of being at the university teaching, is to realize that it's much more important to listen than it is to spend so much time hearing your own voice out there. And I think that's one of the things as a filmmaker is that we spend a lot of time listening. Um, we're here to facilitate their storytelling, not to impose our own story onto other people. And that's kind of the philosophy I take as a professor too, is to first kind of read the room, see where people are. And, once you get a pulse of the room, kind of know what everyone's stories are. And we give them um, opportunities, like through their papers or whether through group presentations, is to let these students, especially the ones that are really quiet sometimes, everyone's got a story to tell. I think that's the bottom line, is be able to give them a platform and to know when to pass the mic.
We definitely believe in that in the Office of Alumni Affairs. We've been guiding that with the podcast. We have Voices of Exchange because it's true. Everyone really does have a story to tell. And I'm sure you've been listening to a lot of people's stories throughout your career as an anthropologist. So how did you decide to go into the field?
You know, this is actually a personal journey. When I was 16, my father passed away, and that was the first time that my family came together to take a really big trip, and it was a trip back to Laos. So I got a chance to go back to the homeland to see the place where my parents fell in love, to see the big blue skies of where my grandparents grew up. For a lot of refugees and immigrants, we don't get a chance to do that because the neighborhoods that we're in are often new to our families, right? So to be able to go back and to listen to the stories of my aunts and uncles for the first time, I think that really changed the trajectory of what I wanted to do with my life. So, taking a tragedy, unfortunately, with my dad passing away, but just kind of converting that to positive energy, and for our family to come together and for me to get to know my own roots a little bit better, kind of was this gateway into this whole new foray of storytelling. And it started with my own story first, but then it got me interested in hearing other people's stories.
So when you started, your ethnographic work is on Laos, right?
Correct. That's correct. Yeah. So we have different. There's different aspects of the Laos story. So there's the refugee coming to America story. There's also the secret war that happened in the mid '60s to '70s. And that's not something that a lot of people know about as well. So we delved into that a bit, and also the storytelling of really lifting up a country through music, through media, and ultimately through a film like Raya and the Last Dragon that took elements of Lao culture and took elements of a lot of Southeast Asian cultures. But one of those cultures was the beautiful aspects and the dimensions of Laos, right? So I think there's so many aspects to being Lao and to being Southeast Asian that it's not just kind of this monolithic, refugee story. It's a story actually that's quite inspiring and uplifting.
That's where a lot of people can connect to it. I mean, especially in Raya and the Last Dragon, it's a very typical hero story. You have this young woman who has lost her father at a very young age, and then she sets on this quest in his name, not just for her people, but really for him to go back and get it. And I think it has a lot of parallels with a lot of us who are from diasporas and have either refugee backgrounds or immigration stories where we go back for the first time to where our families are from or where we were born but didn't grow up in it. And it becomes this very special moment. And then those of us who are doing either some sort of anthropological work, journalism, the arts, and we try to represent it, there's a real challenge in trying to get all aspects of it, right? Because how can you bring all of that experience to an audience who has no idea about it?
Yes, absolutely. That's a fantastic point. I mean, just imagine, Maria, if somebody came up to you and said, "Hey, you know what? You're going to be part of a team that is going to try to represent 700 million people in 11 countries of Southeast Asia." I don't think anybody in their right mind or in their career is going to say, "Yeah, I'm ready right now. I'm totally prepared." It's one of those things where you have to have trust in your team and trust your own experiences, but also be humble in the fact that you're not going to know everything about all those cultures. So you lean on people whose experiences have been rooted in the lived experiences of not only people in the United States or the Western world, Lao Americans or Cambodian Americans or Vietnamese Americans, but people in the homeland. Like that is something that I had to open my eyes to when you're talking about a global project. You have to consider as many dimensions and viewpoints as possible. It's not just the Western filmmaking point of view. It's like we went there on our research trips in Southeast Asia to bring the filmmakers there to feel what it's like being in Southeast Asia rather than just Googling it, rather than just seeing pictures. Like they had to feel what it felt like to get up at 4 o'clock to do the almsgiving in northern Laos. Like those are the things that were really valuable to me, is that they got to live the experiences as much as we could.
That's huge, especially since we're talking about representation. We know how important it is in popular culture, and it's really great that we're starting to have these conversations and, starting to bring more representation in. You shared with me before we decided to jump on the program a story about your direct impact on Raya and the Last Dragon as the lead cultural advisor. Could you tell me about that moment?
Sure. So it was a couple months in. We had just gotten back from our research trip to Southeast Asia. And it was one of the first pieces of information of the movie that I had gotten, and it dealt with the names of the characters. And I remember looking at the names, and it's just something inside of me said, these are not anchored in Southeast Asia. And you just sort of felt like it was like as if you're tripping over a log, as you know, you're reading these names, and I just felt this visceral reaction. And I wrote a note or my reactions back to the head folks, the directors and the producer and and sort of the team leads there. And I remember writing a pretty up to that point my most strongly worded uh, response. And I remember writing it out saying, I don't think these names are appropriate for the movie. And I was really nervous because I was just new on the team, a couple months in, like I said, and I was typing it up and I was about to hit send. And I was actually hesitant to send it because it was being sent on my birthday. And I was thinking to myself, I'm gonna be sending this note in and they're gonna fire me and I'm gonna be fired from a Disney movie on my birthday. And I thought, wow, that'll go down as one of the biggest uh, mishits of my of my career. But I remember sending it and I said, whatever will be at that point. And that's one of the important lessons that I learned is that you got to stand in your center of truth. And it's okay to lose a job. It's just not okay to lose your dignity, in the process. And I remember after sending that a few hours later, the producer wrote back and said, let's talk. And that weekend we hashed out with a few other people some of the names that you see there, Boone, Noi, and Tong. So that was a really memorable experience, being super nervous about, what's going to happen. And then after that, just saying, what will be, will be.
That's such a huge and brave moment, too, because as you said, it's your birthday.
Yeah,
You might lose your job over this.
sure.
Something in you came out and said, no, this is important and I need to do this. Where did that come from? Where did you get that courage from?
I think being part of refugee households and immigrant households, you see that, we've come from many war-torn regions. And, it's telling a story. And we know that there's so many other like real stories out there that have like real lasting impact. For example, I'll give you an example of like the Secret War. That's it was a secret bombing campaign that the U.S. had over what was considered neutral Laos. And I remember the stories being told there, and I remember the people losing their lives and all those bombs dropping. So I remember those stories, and I remember those people have a lot to lose, like their lives were on the line. And all this is if I lose this job, my life is not on the line. So I kind of took it all in perspective, and that refugees face really hard decisions every day. And so that helped me put this in perspective and said, you know what? If they can be brave in a life or death situation, why can't I be brave in just speaking my mind? And so that's how I kind of put things in perspective.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that feels very inspiring to anyone else who's having that moment of wondering to themselves, should I speak up? Should I not speak up? In this continued work towards more cultural representation and getting things heard. I want to shift things a little bit and ask you about your time as an envoy for the American Film Showcase. So you got to visit several US embassies and share your experiences working on the film with local audiences. I know they also got to experience screenings of the film. So could you tell us about what that experience was like and how that has impacted your future work?
It was one of the greatest highlights, not even just of my professional career, but of my life. I had a chance to go back and work with the U.S. Embassy in Indonesia and the U.S. Embassy in Vientiane, Laos, and I did it twice. Um, just going back and being with the children who inspired so much of the film. And many of these children didn't even have a chance to see the movie yet, whether it be lack of access or just the fact that they couldn't afford to see these movies. That was really important to me. And it was really important to Disney too. They were great partners in all this, and the US embassies helped with all the logistics and all the approvals. But I would say the things that stuck out to me were just seeing the kids tremble with hope, not with fear for the first time, right? But just tremble with hope. And they were saying that they can see themselves on the big screen, not even on big screen, like the world, it's for the world to finally take notice of their beautiful culture. And I think for many of them, many of the storytellers, they finally, began to get the confidence and the courage to say, my story does matter. And Raya can be the first step, but it's certainly not going to be the last of storytelling from Southeast Asia. So if I played a small role to help enable that kind of positive thinking, um, that was one of the things that made me the most proud. I mean, it doesn't even matter if they remember me or not. It's just how they felt when they saw themselves in the movie Raya, and if I can see a future producer or director emerge from the thousands of kids that I had a chance to interact with, I would say that was totally worth it. All the jet lag, all the long nights, and all the prep and all that would be worth it. I would do it 1,000 times over, knowing that if it could be one or two more stories out there, um, that was worth it to me. And the impact for me is that I get to bring these stories and share with my students here. So it resonates and it ripples through the future because many of the sort of the mentality of having not enough resources, saying, oh, I don't have enough money to make a film. I don't have money to do this and that. So it's this sort of barrier or obstacle mentality. And I share with them the kids that are there, they truly do not have any resources. I remember this specific story about this group in Southern Laos when we had a movie screening and they came and watched the movie. They were really inspired. And at the end, they asked if they could have all the used cups from the theater and the embassy and us. We said, well, why? So they could rewash it and use it at their community center. And I've never been asked for like used cups, like new soda cups. And we said, no, 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 we will we'll make sure that you get new cups. But it's just that mentality of saying that they're not afraid to move forward, regardless of the resources they did. Like they weren't ashamed to ask. They just said, you know what, this is just something that we need. So it's that type of mentality of constantly moving forward and just being so thirsty to improve yourself, regardless of what you have. Like that's something that I took with me and that I share that story, with my students. So so just so they can see that there's so much creativity and resourcefulness out there.
I was going to say that asking for the used cups, to me, that speaks to a huge resourcefulness of seeing something that someone else would throw away and saying, no, we can actually use this for something. This has value and use. And that reminds me actually of a question I was going to ask about those who want to become film directors and documentary makers. And you touched on it with resources and how much it can take to make one of those. What would you say to someone? What advice would you give to them if they want to make documentary films and they, for instance, don't come from a privileged background where they have an independent source of income? What advice would you give to them?
So I would say that, part of my journey comes from not a lot of resources. And, the lack of resources is actually the foundation of creativity. And I think that's something that we should keep in mind. I remember my first documentary where we didn't have any. We had like a camera that was a couple $100s, and that was about it. And then the documentary made it all the way on PBS. And I remember, I'm sure you know what this is, Maria. Like one of those poppers that stop, you having the harsh P sounds. It's like a circular screen mesh, pretty much. Well, we didn't have one of those because we couldn't afford. That would have cost more than our camera probably. And so what we did was we took four chopsticks made a square and we put a napkin and we taped it. And that's what we use as our popper. And, and that's something that sticks out into my mind till this day. And that was almost 25 years ago. So the idea of not having enough resources is really, it really can't be used as an excuse anymore. I think there's so many creative kids out there that you can just look on YouTube to see what just the amazing talent that there is out there. And I'm glad that there's that sort of friendly competition out there. It says, if that person can do it, why can't I? And I think so this idea of resources, I think that this generation is actually getting over that pretty quickly. The barriers have been lowered a bit. It's been democratized in the way that they can share because back when I was growing, there was not YouTube in a way that there is now to where you can be discovered, in the same way. So I would say that there are the resources there, and I'm not even worried about their creativity. What I've seen with this generation, it gives me great hope that they're going to stand up for what's right. This generation's notion of justice is so nuanced and so progressive that I think sometimes we focus in on the bad. But what I've seen is that, man, there's a lot of diamonds, there's a lot of treasures out there that if you just have to look through the right lens to see it. And, there's a saying that says, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So it's your mentality that you bring into this. And if you want to see diamonds, you're going to see them out there.
Absolutely. And that reminded me as you were talking about the popper, there are tutorials out there showing you how to hand create one. I was, of course, looking this up because we do our own production in-house and we don't necessarily always have all the resources. So I was curious as well, could I create this? And we do all get very creative trying to make things happen in the office, including with our production. So I appreciate that. I'm going to turn back to the film a bit and the projects you're working on. What did it mean to you when you were working on Raya and the Last Dragon? And in particular, what did it mean to you to tell a story that was set in Southeast Asia?
So I think, when you're working on something like you've got your head to the ground, it's very intense. Like I remember just getting images every week and just having a week's turnaround time. So I looked at everything that went in the film. So as a visual anthropologist, I provided comprehensive look at everything that went in the film, the characters, flowers, little animals and everything. So I think at times, you were so buried in the work, but it was when I talked to people like my mom, particularly, she was a great source of inspiration for me. It was just seeing what she went through. And I remember one of the first movies I ever saw in the theaters was Fantasia. And I remember I saw the Disney logo and I didn't know what it was because I came to this country. And then if you would have told me 40 years later, you would have been working on, a Disney film, I would have thought you were nuts. But just going back and working on this film, it was so helpful to kind of step back and talk to somebody that wasn't involved with the film, but you knew that it was going to be affected. Like my children's friends, my mom, people that didn't know what was coming. And it just sort of refreshed and kind of reframed things for me. Like, we're doing this for them. Partly for my mom, for all her struggles and her generation, just to pay homage to them, but also for the future, to enshrine something on screen forever. Like this will be on Disney Plus, hopefully forever. For them to see that there was a time when people didn't have these opportunities. And I think when they're ready to have a more nuanced discussion, I'm talking about people of my kids' generation. They're still young and they just enjoy the film as sort of a story, but they don't necessarily know sort of the representation backdrop to it, right? But when they grow up, they're gonna hopefully realize that there was a time when this was a struggle. I hope when they're ready, it's not so much of a struggle, but there's going to be a generation that has to sacrifice. It's probably you and I are probably roughly the same generation, where there's a transition period where people are waking up to this idea that there can be more. There can be different ideas of beauty. There can be a whole spectrum of the way that we view the world. So that helped a lot, was just, again, stepping back, talking to folks like the older generation and the younger generation and people not directly involved with the film. I think that helped to refresh and recalibrate my lens when it was, it was kind of a grind.
Yeah, that speaks a lot to the American immigration story, where the first generation goes through so much, and by the time you get to the second or third, it hopefully comes as a surprise how difficult things were. And you find out things about your parents and your grandparents, and you think, wait, what? You went through that? It's the hopeful progression of things. And hopefully this film is part of that, of saying to your kids and to their kids that this was a huge moment moving forward, but it comes as a surprise that it was a huge moment.
Correct. Yeah. It's just like, I'm sure all those folks and who, were part of something historic, you don't realize that it's historic when you're working on it. It's kind of like, they have the benefit of all this hindsight and all this framing and all the pundits making their commentary and kind of saying, well, this was the first of this and the first of that. But when you're in it, it's just, you're trying to do the best that you can, at the moment, and kind of that history right itself.
Exactly. Speaking of history and the future, what's next for you? What are the next projects and even films, if you can talk about them, that you're working on?
So there is another film that I'm working on. I can't get too much into the details, but I'll just say that stories from Southeast Asia are going strong, and I'd be happy to come back and talk about it after the film's over. So hopefully there's a Mentor Talks part two, that we can do. So I'm working on another feature film that has elements of a place that I'm least ignorant in. I'll put it that way. And then there's also I'm also working on a game that also has elements of of a place I'm familiar with. So those are two kind of global projects that hopefully will have some impact on the way that we tell stories from Southeast Asia. So those are the two that I'm working on now, other than, being a professor and a full-time dad. I love being a dad to my two girls. I think that's, a lot of the motivation behind what I do. I think, right now they don't fully understand the impact of all these projects, but, when they're ready to have that conversation, I hope that they'll be proud. I think, one of the things that drives me is trying to make them proud.
I'm sure they will be. And yes, we'd love to talk about those other projects when they're out and when you can talk about them. That would be very exciting. It looks like we're running out of time, so I have one last question. So before we go, what is your number one tip for those who want to have an impact on pop culture in their careers?
Oh gosh, I would say this. Start with any project that's in front of you. Do not wait for this perfect opportunity where you have the right amount of money, the right amount of time, where you feel great about everything. That's rarely, or if ever, is going to happen, where everything's good, all the stars are going to be aligned. Start when you can start. If you have a group of friends that want to do a project, start there. And you're going to need a team. A lot of the things that you do will be working with, sometimes the same people on multiple projects. But I would say don't wait until everything is ready and everything is lined up. Start building a team early, build bridges. And I would say there's no small project. Every project feeds into another. So take heart that all of these things will snowball into something much greater into the future.
Thanks so much for all of that. And that was really incredible advice. I'm so glad we got to chat today. So I want to thank you first for being on our program, and I want to thank all of our online viewers for watching. If you're interested in learning more about awesome exchange alumni like Dr. Arunsak, please visit our website at alumni.state.gov and follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon on our next Mentor Talks.